Welcome to the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. As a surviving sibling myself, I knew that I wanted to share my story, my brother's story. I lost my brother to a homicide in November 2016, and after going through this experience, I knew that I wanted to share my story and his story. And now it's your turn to share your stories. So today, Ginger is going to share about her brother, Mike, whom she lost back in 2019. So, Ginger, thank you again for coming on the show and being so open and sharing your story. Tell us a little bit about you and Mike, your relationship. Give us some insight into your childhood and growing up together and what that family dynamic was like.
Okay, so I was 9 years older than Mike. So I was my dad's only child, and then my mom and my stepfather had my brother when I was 9. So I went back and forth between those two households. I wanted a little brother. If my mom was sitting here, she would tell you from the time I could talk. So when he was born, I immediately at 9 years old knew I wanted to be a mom. And so I had a lot of maternal instincts towards him immediately, even as a little girl. My mom was ill when he was born, and just because I was so much older, I helped take care of him, helped raise him. And so we were just always extremely close. I would babysit him. When I was a teenager, he came with me to games and school functions, and we're a very musical family. So I was in chorus. He came to all of those things. We've just always been extremely close with our parents and to each other. From the time he was able to walk and talk, he was singing and dancing. So we got to guide him and watch him grow into what he eventually became. And it was very rare for me to see siblings how we were. And maybe it was because of the age difference. There was also a race. My stepfather is black. My mom is white. Looking at my brother, you would not know that. I am lighter than him. He's like this pale, freckled face, redheaded. So our family dynamic is very multicultural, and it's just amazing. It was amazing to grow up in that family.
I think it just warms my heart to listen to you talk about that experience, because we almost have a theme this season, Ginger, because there's quite a few of us on here that have like age gap relationships with our siblings. It's very interesting how every season there's a different vibe and theme. That seems to be one of the themes this season. So,
and it just falls into place. Yeah.
It just falls into place. It's very interesting. But I connect with that. And I'm sure a lot of you listening who have an experience like Ginger connect with that. It's not my brother. My brother and I are 3 years apart. But my sister, I have a sister 10 years younger than me, and we have a very special relationship. And I connect with what you're saying because it was like becoming a mother at 10. We're 10 years apart. Same thing. Like I brought her to work. I remember giving her first little gigs. I'd be like, hey, will you come sweep the store for me? Because I always worked in retail before I owned my own business. And so I was like, sweep the store. And then I'd take her to like Francesca's or a little shop and get her a new dress. And
Yes.
I loved that. My maternal instincts too just came out. So you described that better than I ever could, because I think it paints a really strong image and emotion for people, because not everybody feels that way when they get a sibling, but I definitely felt that bond as well. So I really understand and have some good insight into your relationship already with Mike, because that's not just a sibling. You're also a maternal figure. You're like mom number 2, right? Another parent. Yes. And you feel this sense of responsibility at a very young age. It really changes you.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah.
Changed me from so young, and it shaped my life because I was an athlete. Mike was a singer. I was an athlete. I could have gone to college, but I just wanted to be a mom. I wanted to get to a place where I could help support a family and raise kids. And it was because of him.
He inspired all of that. Oh, it's so beautiful. I love that. So tell us, I connect with you too. Mike, the musician, my brother was a total musician too. We were chatting a little bit before the episode started, so I totally get that.
Tell us a little bit about Mike and his musical talents. What was his thing? Was he a singer? Tell us what he was in, or was he like a jack of all trades? I'd love to learn more about that.
Okay, started out with Michael Jackson, right? When he was little and with the microphone and the dancing for the family at the parties and all of that. We had this big bird, this yellow fluffy life like big bird that you put a cassette in and his mouth moved and sang songs. He started singing with that thing when he was like 2. And we were like, we're onto something here. He's remembering the words and he's like carrying a tune and he's a baby. And then progressed with Michael Jackson and then all of the music that I was into growing up, the Aerosmith and even the boy bands, New Kids on the Block, but like Whitney Houston and all of that stuff, New Edition and all of that we just loved. And he loved what I loved. And he would just put on shows. And then when he got into high school, he was in all the choruses and he was part of a quartet and he just fell in love with all types of music. He did quartets and then he started to get into opera. He sang in some operas in Chicago, mostly self-taught, and then through his high school teachers, he got into a company and had some really good mentors for opera. And then he fell in love with the blues. And once he fell in love with the blues, that was it.
That was his thing.
That was his
done.
thing.
Yep.
He was done. He never had a license. So he would walk to the library and study and read books and listen to tapes and watch videos. And it was just his passion. That's all. He would rather do that than he wasn't a partier. He wasn't anything like that. He was studying music. He was training himself. And then got onto a couple of bands. And once he met his blues mentor, he joined that band and ended up being their lead vocal. And for years they've traveled. He's big in Norway. He's like in Europe, and any of the blues community knows his name.
Knows Mike.
Yeah. At his passing, by the time he had passed, he had already won a traditional blues album of the year award it's like the Grammys, but it's just for blues. In Memphis. Cool. And so he had won that the year before, and then he passed away, and they had already been nominated for 4 awards at the Blues Awards in 2019, which we then had to go to Memphis to accept on his behalf because he ended up cleaning house that night.
Right.
Yeah, he was
so
just
incredible.
A very hilarious, determined, passionate kid.
Yeah.
And loved family. Family most important. Both of us. We would much rather be on a Saturday night at our aunt or grandma's house or at our house with our cousins than out with friends or doing whatever they were doing. We just had a close family.
And that's beautiful. And it's really a testament to what you talked about just a few minutes ago too, about how you felt when he came into this world and there was just a connection. And when you're that connected to someone, like I relate to you because if my brother wanted to hang out, and he's like my younger brother, right? But if he wanted to hang out, I didn't need to hang out with anybody else. We just had this deep connection. So I definitely understand that and appreciate that. And I think it's such a gift. Even though we've lost our brothers, I think I look back now and I'm able to just appreciate that I had so much love and we had so much love for each other. It doesn't mean everything was always perfect. There's a lot of drama and things that happen, right?
Absolutely.
But I'm grateful to have experienced that. And I'm sure you feel the same way.
Absolutely. I feel it 100%.
Tell us, so you mentioned just briefly, and we talked about this before, of course, we jumped into the episode, you mentioned he never had a license.
Yes.
Now, the reason he never drove or had a license is because your brother Mike had epilepsy. So this is the first time we're really diving into this on the show, and it's such a passion of mine to share about sibling loss, but also to share different things that our siblings struggled with, or unfortunately, how they pass different ways, right? It's so important to bring awareness. Gosh, we're going to be telling stories for a long time because there are so many different ways that we lose our siblings. So explain to us a little bit about Mike's journey with that, if you don't mind, Ginger, because I think, again, this is huge and really important to bring awareness to it. And of course, we're going to talk about how he passed too, but he had this his whole life. This was something he struggled with,
So,
right?
yeah, I remember I was a teenager, and I think he had started going to preschool, kinder care type of place. They noticed some behavior. Cool. And I think one time I remember he must have had a seizure at school, but they said he passed out or something. He ended up in the hospital. I remember him going in for testing and all of this stuff. I was young and also living like half and half between my parents. So I don't remember all the actual details, but it started like very young, 5, 6 years old, when they started noticing the behavior at school and the testing started. I don't know exactly his age. I would have to ask my mom when he was diagnosed, but when he got a little older into his like young adolescent years, like maybe 12, he started having seizures like regularly at home. So me and I had 2 little boys at this time, but I was living back at home, and my boys and I were going out to wash my car in the yard, and Mike was going to come out and help. And so we were out there and we were waiting, and he had said he was going to jump in the shower. He wasn't coming out. And I went in the house to check on him, and the water was running, and I knocked and he didn't answer. And so I got my mom, and I'm like, I didn't want to bust in on my teenage brother in the bathroom. My mom came and he didn't answer. And so we opened the door, and that was the first time I really saw and had to be involved in him having a seizure.
Right.
His young teenage years is when it started to be more normal and more frequent. Sometimes it would happen multiple times in a day. Sometimes you have to go a year without having a seizure in order to get your license. Sometimes he would get to 9, 10 months, but it always happened. He always ended up having one. So yeah, he never had his license.
Mm.
Yeah, and they've always just medication is how they tried to control it. As my brother grew and stuff like that, he would have seizures, and then they would have to fluctuate the meds and all that stuff, because he did end up being a pretty big guy. And as far as height, muscular, so he was very big into working out, a gym rat, and so I feel like they had to mess with his meds a lot. And if he happened to miss it, sometimes that's a lot of times when the seizures would happen.
Wow. Yeah, such an active guy. He's in the gym, he's
Mm-hmm.
singing, he's traveling around. Wow. And there's a lot of folks that struggle with something like epilepsy or have different types of things like this we have, and it's for life, and we have to use medication and just monitor it. Some people live a much more cautious life. So I think that's really cool that he just did not let that hold him back. And he was like, you know what? Nope. I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to do my music. I'm going to travel.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to follow I think that's a real testament to who he is and was, right?
Absolutely. 100%.
We hope you're enjoying this incredible episode of the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. We'll be back in just a minute after hearing from our incredible sponsor.
If you've lost a sibling, trust me, I know exactly how you feel. I'm Maya. I'm the host of the Surviving Siblings podcast, but I'm also the founder of Surviving Siblings Support. I know that going through this experience is extremely difficult, whether you've lost a brother like me, a sister, or perhaps more than one sibling. Trust me, we know exactly how you feel. So that's why I started our Patreon account. You can click below to find out more about our Patreon. If you join our Patreon group, it'll give you just a little bit of extra support that you need along your journey as a bereaved sibling, or as we like to call it, a surviving sibling. We offer monthly support groups. We offer a free copy of our grief guide that is actually found on Amazon. It's called the Grief Guide for Surviving Siblings. We also offer direct messaging to our community and to me for extra support. And we have incredible events. We have workshops throughout the year that you'll get access to, and you'll also have access to our summit that happens annually. And so much more as you'll connect with a community of surviving siblings that understand the journey of losing a sibling. You can click below to join us today and also check out some additional VIP features that we offer. I hope to see you in the group, and until then, keep on surviving, my surviving siblings. Yeah, I mean, I totally get having to adjust the medication, and oh gosh, it's so tough. And you described that moment, like, of, he's not coming outside. Like, there are these moments, and I find especially in the sibling stories that we share, when it's a sibling that has something that they've had for life, right? And there's these moments where when you come on the show, people will be like, I will never forget this moment. You will never forget that moment for the rest of your life, where you were like, wow, he's really struck. Like, we're going into the bathroom and he's really struggling with this. These are the things that are just imprinted on you. Let me ask you this though, Ginger. As he was going through life with epilepsy, did you ever think this would be like, did you have some fear that this would be detrimental to like his actual life? Or did you just think, because I think I would probably be like, okay, he's on the right meds, he's good, but I'm sure that fluctuated. I'm curious how that was for you and how you felt being so close and like a mother figure to him.
I'm so glad you asked that, because that's how I felt. What you just said. I never thought this would take his life. If you ask my mom, it was her biggest fear.
Interesting. You had different kind of perspectives and kind of
Correct.
feelings. Interesting.
So she said, I always knew in the back of my mind that this can take him. And I looked at her and I was like, what? I didn't have that connection with it. It was just like, and he always had grand mal seizures, which is the worst kind. But it was like, okay, it happened. And he never wanted anyone to know when it happened. He was very quiet about it. And so I'm sure there are a lot that I didn't even know, especially I was older when I moved out, and all of that, had my kids and my husband. And then we moved to Florida. Gosh, I don't know how old he was when I moved to Florida, but we moved to Florida, and that's when his blues career really started to pick up, but he was also still struggling with that. And I know that there's times where he told my mom not to say anything, type of thing. So I know my mom knows all of it. She was there for all of it. She's the one that had to get on him about his medicine, which he would, not so much in the later years, but would get on his nerves. Yes, Mom, I'm taking my medicine. But that one time that she doesn't ask you and you don't take it. So that was her. And so she always had that fear of what's going to happen if he doesn't take his medicine.
Yeah.
Where I just got the phone calls after it already happened, and that he's resting and he's going to be okay. And aside from the ones that I physically saw myself, which weren't many, but there were a few. He had one at my house also one time. But she was there for it all. So it was an actual fear for her. As for me, it was just like something he's going to have to recover from, but he's going to recover.
It's a thing in his life, and this is what we all have, heavy things to carry, and it all looks different for different people, and this is just his thing, and that was his thing. That was your mindset, it sounds.
Yes.
And why wouldn't it be, right? And I also understand your mom's perspective too, because it's like you both were carrying parent roles, and like you were the parent that was like, oh, but he's okay now. It's okay. He's okay.
Yes.
We had a scare and he's going to take his medicine. But then she was being the parent that was like, take your medicine. And she was you were seeing different perspectives. It doesn't mean one is right or wrong. It's just different perspectives in the time. And I think I'm so glad I asked you that question. It's something I'm always curious about, especially when we have siblings that have something diagnosed quite young or at birth, right? And what was that journey like? And what was that fear like? Or were you fearing that, right? There's all these complexities that happen.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing too, Ginger, in your story is that because you had that mindset, and I want to get into how we lost Mike, but it sounds like this was quite shocking for you then because of your mindset, right? When this happened?
Oh, it was shocking to everyone. Totally unexpected. Totally, yeah. It was absolutely shocking, and it ripped us apart for sure.
So let's talk about that. This was 5 years ago. He was 32, he was rocking and rolling,
Yeah.
literally, in his blues career, right?
Yeah.
And
He was actually 33. I'm
okay,
just thinking now. And yeah, his birthday, he turned 34 that year. So yeah, he was 33.
got it.
Rocking and rolling, like you said. Like I said, was traveling the world. He was being nominated for things. He was being asked and considered for TV shows. There was a huge snowstorm in Chicago, in Illinois, where we're from and where he lived. And he had a gig in the city. And because he did not have his license, he took the train a lot. So he took the train. He also wasn't feeling well. He thought maybe he was getting some food poisoning or something like that. So his girlfriend had taken him to the train station, and he was like, I'll be fine, and goes to the city, does his gig, and then the snowstorm hits, shuts down public transportation for the night. So he has to stay with a bandmate in the city. So then that bandmate puts him on the train the next morning, and he goes home. And I believe he had his first seizure when he got home. Went to sleep after that, woke up a little later, had another seizure. I believe that he got up after that one and had told his girlfriend that he was going to take a shower. And she was like, I'm right here, keep the door open, type of thing, or whatever. And he was like, I'll be okay. And he went to get in the shower. And she walked out to sit in the front room with their kids. And she, a few minutes later, heard a loud noise. And he had a seizure in the shower. And the way that he apparently fell and was laying, she could not get all the way in, and because he was soaking wet from the shower, and like I said, he was a big guy.
Yeah.
She couldn't get to him, basically. And the paramedics were there. I believe they worked on him for quite some time, and they just couldn't bring him back.
Wow.
So yeah, he passed away right there in their brand new apartment that they had been in for, I don't even know if it was 2 weeks at that point, maybe.
Not quite the housewarming they expected. Wow.
Correct.
Ginger. Wow.
Yeah.
So did she call you to let you know? What was that like for you? Because we all, as you know, on the show, and you guys who listen, we all have that moment. We have that call, right? Did she call you? What happened next? Because that sounds like so fast, and how like disarming for her, right? And
Right.
how difficult. And they have children too.
Yeah. And yes, they have a little girl, Holland, and baby Michael. And he was a week away from turning 1 year old. And so my mom called me. I remember sitting on the couch just got done watching a movie with my husband and just hanging out, having a fun night. My mom calls, we see it's her, and we were just like laughing, just having a date night. And he was like, "Oh no, you're going to be on the phone for an hour?" Because it's my mom.
Yeah.
And he was like, "Don't answer it." And I was like, "I don't know. I got to answer it. It's like it was a weird time for her to be calling. And so I answered it, and she just said, "Ginge, he's gone." And I said, "Mom?" She said, "Mike's gone." And I fell out and screamed, and my husband grabbed the phone because I couldn't stop screaming.
Yeah.
And so I know that she told him. I think she tried to call back. I went to the bathroom and threw up. And I really don't remember much else from that night, except for my kids coming in one by one as they got home. I think my youngest daughter was the only one home at that time, and she was upstairs in her room. And I don't remember her coming down. I think she might have been a little too scared. And then my kids, I remember sitting on my couch crying, just staring straight ahead, and having each one of my kids on the side of me hugging me. But I really don't remember much else after that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the next day was like a blur, a shock. And
Yes, we all know. We can all relate to this, Ginger. Yep, it's a blur.
yeah,
It's like the world is whizzing by you. It's so intense.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So then
Did you guys go to Chicago? What was next for
yeah,
you then?
that's
Yeah.
what we had to do is I got on a plane within the 2 days or 3 days. And then they came a couple days after me, and we were up in Illinois for a week while we did the service and stuff like that. It's funny, there's a lot of weather stuff related to my brother. It was like a polar vortex. The 2 days of his wake and his funeral, it was like 50 below wind chill in
Yeah.
Illinois. Yeah. All these crazy weather things that still happen on certain times like around him, where it's birthday or the anniversary or whatever, is like the weather is weird or freezing or something like that. But people were wrapped around that building in the 50 below weather to come in to see him. It was pretty amazing. I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah. And it's beautiful when you see people show up
Absolutely.
for your loved one that's passed, and it's definitely a moment where you're like, wow, like my brother or my sister has touched these
Many
people.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's something it's something I experienced too, Ginger. So I still to this day have people reach out to me, which is really wild, but it's a beautiful thing.
It is. It's very beautiful.
Yeah. So what was that like for you? So you guys had the service, you had all these folks. Good old Chicago. I used to live in Minnesota as a kid. Oh my God, I'll never forget. I'll never forget, to bring a little levity to this, getting sent home. I'm 37. This was like back in the day before social media and all of that. And emailing was just becoming a thing. And so I get sent home with a note being like, it's going to be -60 out. Like you can't come to school. Trust me, I get the Chicago weather. That is so impressive that these folks showed up. And it's just, again, really shows what he was doing and who he was as a person and all these lives he was touching. It's really a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it was beautiful. It was beautiful. There were musicians that flew in from other states, other countries. Just even our hometown community. My stepdad is like one of the big coaches in our town. Everybody knows and respects him, and Mike just had a huge following and a huge effect on everyone around him.
Yeah. And that's when you're in so much pain and the loss has just happened. It's sometimes in the moment, I found this. I'm curious what you think about this, Ginger, but I don't know if I appreciated it right in that moment as much as I do now, like looking back on it, right? Because you're in such a fog and it's so difficult. Did you feel that way too? Oh my God, this is amazing. But yeah, reflecting back, it's...
Yeah, I noticed it. I think myself and like my husband and my kids, we noticed it right away because we were removed from all the big stuff that had been happening. We weren't at as many shows. We didn't get to go to the Blues Fest. We didn't get to go to all the big things that he was performing at and stuff like that. When they would come to Florida, we would go if they were by us and stuff like that. But seeing the crowd of people was pretty new to us. We were there through all the young stuff and the high school stuff. So I was the one taking pictures and videos all through high school, and when he was singing opera at the restaurant down the street and stuff like that. But the blues stuff, we only got to experience the live part of it so little that coming in and seeing all of those people, we were like, whoa. Yeah. And my mom and my stepdad and everybody are like, oh yeah, this is the crowd. And we're like, whoa, this is crazy. It was very touching.
Yeah. It's what I always say are like the gifts and the pain, right? Or those little shining lights, even when it's so dark. Oh God, that's so beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us, so you guys have this incredible service, -50. I totally have the scene painted because I get it. It's undescribably cold, guys. If you haven't experienced that, it's so horrific. So you really have to love someone to show up for that, for sure. So tell us what happened. What was life like afterwards? It's so difficult. It's a whirlwind. We've all been there too, but what was that like for you? Obviously, you had to return back to life, and walk us through what that was like for you as his sister.
For me, a lot of regret, wishing you spent more time, took more phone calls, things like that were very hard for me. Going through our old text messages, I struggled with the regret mostly.
Which is a common thing that comes up, Ginger. And I really appreciate your vulnerability and saying that, because not everybody talks about that, but everybody asks about it, right?
Yeah.
They're like, how do I get over the regret or the guilt
Yeah.
of, but I think I'm curious, you're 5 years in now, so I'm curious how you moved with that, because it still makes you emotional, which is okay. But how did you move through that? Because I think it's important for us as we move through the journey to allow ourselves to feel all of those emotions and then realize, of course, we would have done some things differently had we known this was going to happen, right? And I think that's a part of the journey, but curious to hear how you've been able to move through it, because it still makes you emotional, and it always will, I think, right?
Yeah. Oh, I don't think there'll ever be a time where. Are there times where I could talk about him in a story and not get emotional? Yes. But getting like deep into it or talking about the day or what I actually miss, those are hard. It's easier for me to listen to his music than it is for me to watch his music. Because when I
Yes.
actually see him on the stage, I'm like, ugh. So some things are easier than others. I really just I was told to do therapy. I was told to do this or that. I just had to let myself go through things day by day. I go further in between now of having days like this where I will actually sit and cry about it. But a lot of that too is I'm working, and which is a good thing, because at first I could not work for a little bit. I took a couple weeks off of work, but even going back, you're running to the bathroom or finding a quiet corner, dark corner somewhere, and you're just trying to fight through it. I have 4 kids. I have a husband. I have a household to run. I had to try and just deal with it. I just don't know that what really got me through everything was my faith.
Yeah. Yeah, that was my next question for you. I was going to say, Ginger, there's always something for everyone that kind of pulls them through. And I love to hear that. So I want to ask you about this, because I want to talk about this for a minute, if you don't
Yeah.
mind. So prior to losing your brother, was your faith very strong prior to
Yes.
losing your brother? Yes. So you already
Yes.
had this strong established. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, because when you lost him, do you feel like you lost faith before you regained it again? Or I'm really curious, because that was my experience. I felt really connected to God. I went to Catholic school and stuff growing up, to give context,
Okay.
but I became a little more spiritual. I would classify myself a little more on the Catholic side, because I wear a cross, I connect with some of it, but I'm more spiritual now. But for me, I was really getting really connected to God, was really finding that again. And then when my brother died, I was like, there's nothing exists. It went to this really opposite dark place. And
Mm-hmm.
then I redefined my relationship with God, and I'm back again, and it's much stronger, and I have this really strong faith that I don't think I ever had in my life. So I'm
Right.
curious, because I'm like really connecting with this part of your journey, and even those of you who are listening who are not religious, it doesn't matter. It's about having some kind of connection or faith to something bigger. So I'm curious, Ginger, is that similar to your experience, or did you just stay, because some folks just stay really true, and I'm like, God, I wish I had
God.
been that way.
Yeah.
But what happened with you on that journey?
I'm so glad. You're like, when I think in my head, I hope she asks a question and then you ask it. It's crazy. But I had been saved for, gosh, 20, maybe 21 years
Mhm.
when he passed away. But I also had 2 other very traumatic deaths, my aunt and my grandmother, that I had dealt with in my life. And those 2 deaths made me not believe, made me angry at God. Why would God do this? Why would God take them? After being through those 2 and then being saved and starting my walk in Christianity, because I grew up Lutheran, and then my husband's mother started planting the seed in me, and really helped me on my walk with God and my relationship with Jesus. And so when Mike passed away, I found myself in a very different space, because as devastated as I was, and I thought that I would be mad at God, but I wasn't. I knew that God didn't take him from me. I knew this was worldly and this was an illness. And so I almost found myself wanting to be mad at God, because then I could just be mad at that thing, or be place blame and be mad about it and let it go. But I just found myself talking to Jesus, going, I know that this was, perhaps you saved him, because now he's not going to have to deal with this anymore. But I was not angry at God.
Mm-hmm.
I was very, God is what brought me through. Being able to just pray, or even just lay and cry and feel the presence of God. I didn't have that before when I went through losing people. Yeah. I truly felt it now, because I know, because of what I know, and because of my walk and where I am. So that's truly really what continues to get me through, because there's still times where I am just like, don't know that I'll ever accept it. I just don't know that I can, but I just know I'm going to see him again. I just know that.
So much to comment on that, Ginger. Thank you for sharing. And I was just curious, because whenever I meet a sibling who has really strong faith. Again, those of you listening, some of you may not, some may have other outlets, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But I'm always curious. I'm like, where were you? Where was your relationship, right, with God or whatever faith you are, right? And it's interesting because everybody always has different answers. And so I think it's just so important to talk about that. And I think it's interesting that you had 2 significant deaths, and then they always say it happens in threes, right? I'm like, it was very true for me too. I lost 2 more really beautiful people in my life within like that year and a half after my brother. So it's I understand what you're saying, Ginger, because for me it was like I was like flip-flopped of you. I was spinned around the other way, and this was so like I lost my grandfather, who I wasn't close with, like in 2009. Hadn't really had this close of a loss. And then these 2 other ones happened, and it was just like, oh my God. But I was angry. I was angry at God. I was like, no way, you don't exist anymore. You know what I mean? I'm like, if you existed, you would not have done this. We're on the same page, Ginger. Exactly. And what I grew, and I've talked about here on the show before, and you guys can go back and listen to season 1, because I go real deep into this if you want to listen to it. But through time, I realized this isn't drawing yourself closer to your faith, whatever that may be. Maybe it's nature. Maybe your faith is nature, whatever it is, right? Like, I'm not here to say that. But for me, developing a deeper spirituality, I always say this too, Ginger, that really what helps you get through the grieving journey, and we talk about siblings here, so sibling loss, but I think it's true of all grief, is having a couple of different aspects taken care of. So your mental health, your emotional health, and your spiritual health. And sometimes people are like, well, I'm not religious. And I'm like, that's not what I mean, though. Whatever you believe in, if you believe in nature walks, the world is real, right? Go in nature, connect. It's about a spiritual connection. And so that was a part, and that was like my last piece, because my physical, I knew I was running, I was taking care of my health. That changed. Perfect. Going to therapy was for my mental. Eventually went to group, things like that was my mental. But my spiritual was the one that lagged, because I was angry. Like you said, I was angry. And so once I released the anger, the spiritual aspect really helped. And we don't have to understand it all. We don't have to understand why, whatever our spiritual belief is, why this has happened, because we're never going to have all the answers. Correct. But it's a great feeling to know there's something bigger out there. And I think that was a mega turning point for me. That took me a lot longer than you, Ginger, so I'm a little jealous, not gonna lie. Wish I had that in my tool belt a little earlier, which is why we do this show and talk about these things. But yeah, I'm really glad I asked you about that. And I'm really glad that you have your faith. And I connect with you as well because my parents were Lutheran. They just put us in Catholic school. But as life has, my dad always tells me, he thinks it's very interesting because he's like, it's interesting that you found your connection with the more of the Catholic and more of spiritual. And I'm like, yeah, but I think it just, things in our life shape us and call us to certain things. And that's what happened for me. And I'm so glad that you have that in your life because I think it is helpful. And those three elements, like, I just think it's how you move forward. And like you also said this too, I want to point this out. You said you're never going to accept it. I am not a fan of the term acceptance, but I am a fan of acknowledgement. We're here. We're talking about it. We've acknowledged it. But this term of acceptance makes us, because it comes from the stages of grief.
Yep.
And everybody's, okay, how long does it take, especially in the beginning, right? You're like, how long does it take to get to acceptance? How am I going to do that?
Yeah.
The reality is you don't, because you're going to be sad again, or you're going to be angry again, or you're going to feel an emotion again. It's about, are you able to acknowledge it, right? Are you able to say, yes, this happened, and this is where I am with it? And I'm like you, I'm never going to accept it, but I acknowledge it, and we're going to talk about it.
And it's so different for everybody. With my other two significant deaths in my life, I did go to group. We did the circle group, I did therapy, I did all of these other things. They didn't help me in the way that my faith has helped me.
Yeah.
So, the way that I actually turned out and dealt with those deaths in my earlier years, I know I would have been a different person mentally and with my mental health had I had my faith back then. No doubt about it. And so I'm eternally grateful to my mother-in-law for helping me find that. But I also noticed in the grief process, like the first year, a lot of people say, oh, the first year is the worst. The first year is the worst. For me, year 2 was the absolute worst.
Me too, Ginger.
Like all the noise stopped. And for my brother, because he was a musician, maybe for you too, there were all these tribute shows happening. There was the awards. There were fellow musicians that were holding shows in his honor and stuff like that. People were raising money for his family and his children and all that first year. And then all of a sudden, the second year is like silent. And now all the noise has stopped. The music has down, if you will. And then you're left with the reality of what's really, like, it's really over. So year 2 was definitely the worst one. I think year 1, I'm in shock. You're in shock. At least for me, in shock and just in a daze of disbelief.
Yeah.
And then that second year when you're like, oh, okay, nothing's going on. More and more people stop calling or texting or checking in, and because everybody's moving on, and then you're like, I should be moving on. Right. And I can't, because this is even worse than last year. Yes. So the grieving journey is different for everybody.
It is, but what's so interesting, so I had the same experience as you, Ginger, year 2. Your one was awful. And I want to be clear to anybody who's newly bereaved, and we talk about this all the time here in group, on TikTok, all the places you guys interact with me. Your one is awful. We're not saying it's not awful. It's awful. No. But you're right. The majority of you who have lost a sibling, you're in shock when it happens because it's not supposed to happen, right? Are we 33, 34, 7? Come on. This is so young. It's not supposed to happen. So there's a shock aspect to it. And that lasts longer for some people, or it's a little bit shorter for others. But that first year is pretty textbook. If you listen to the episodes here, Ginger, you and I are sharing it with pretty much everyone else. The second year, you had such a beautiful way of describing that. The music stops, literally. And in your case with Mike, right, literally the music stops. Everyone else is moving on with their lives because they have families and jobs, and that's it. No reason for us to be upset about that. But this is still very real for us. And it's, oh my God, the next birthday comes around, the next holiday comes around, Christmas, New Year's, and it's real. They're not there. and it really is setting in. And I like how you described it by the music stops, because it just resonates with me so much, because you're in the silence. You're in the true silence
True
now,
silence. Yep.
and you're with your thoughts and your feelings. And that's why, like you said, your faith, I love that you're sharing about this so openly on the episode, because your faith is what worked for you. And that's why we encourage people, and I love everyone that comes on the show, encouraging people to try different things, because therapy might be the right thing for you, or going to a group. I see a lot of people in our group really thrive because they're super extroverted. Or it's funny because grief changes you so much. So sometimes these folks that are like, I was so introverted, but now I just want to be around people that understand me. So you have to be open to different things, because grief really, like you said, it evolves. It it's a journey, like we were talking
It
about.
is. Yeah.
So you may find what worked for you in the past, it might be something totally different, because I'm extremely extroverted. Shocker. I know you guys are shocked by that, but I needed one-on-one therapy. I needed like to quiet all of this going on in my head, because it was like, we're talking about very quiet year two. I needed someone where I could be just like very vulnerable and open. So I think trying different things and being open to a faith and whatever is going to work for you, because you're not the same person anymore. It changes
Right.
you.
And also, part of my experience with this is I don't know. I'm sure there's people that are close with their parents and people that aren't close with their parents, but you're not just grieving. For me, in my case, I felt like I was grieving my brother, right? But then you start to realize you're not just grieving your brother, because your parents are never going to be the same.
Right.
And so I also went through grieving the mom, the stepdad that I had, because I just knew that they were not ever going to be the same again. So that was another really hard part of this journey for me. Me and my mom are best friends. We're extremely close. And so it's very hard that I know that a part of my mom is gone, that I'm never going to get that back.
Yeah.
But I'm a mom and I completely understand. And I don't know how she has been able to deal with this with such grace. And she's just like the strongest person I know. It's like we said over and over again, it's a journey, and it's so different for everybody.
Yeah. And what you're describing, again, so perfectly, Ginger, is the losses we don't know about until it happens. We lose who our parents were. They're forever changed too. So why wouldn't we? But we're not going to think about that until something like this happens. We just don't think
Right.
about that. Why would we? That'd be
Right.
morbid if we thought about those things all the time,
Right.
right? I'm
Right.
grateful we don't think about it, but it's so important that we do talk about it, right? And
Yeah.
I think what I find in sharing all of your stories is there's really no in between with the family dynamic. It'll really rip a family apart, or it will really bring a family together. And what I love in your story is just the beautiful relationship that you have with your mother. And you guys are still obviously close, and you're close with your
Yeah.
obviously stepdad, like you have a family unit.
Yep.
But you're normalizing and also saying, guys, yes, I have this beautiful relationship with my parents, but they're changed. And I understand. And there's finding that love and compassion within yourself. And as a mom, of course, you're going to get it, because your mind, I'm sure, went, oh my God, if I lost one of mine, like, how would I even be? So you have that compassion and empathy, which I think is really important to continue that bond and to grow together through, you grow through the grief instead of,
Oh, yeah.
I think that's important too, growing with it and understanding that
Yeah.
you are all changed.
It just becomes a part of who you are. And it's just another version of who you are, and that's okay.
It
could
is
have
okay.
it could have yeah, it happened. Life is a part of death, right? We doesn't make it easier, and it took me 5 years to even talk to myself like this. Yes, life is a part of death, and even address it towards my brother's situation, because I still I hurt for his children and my parents and his girlfriend so much, and the things that could be. It's just hard not to hurt about it.
Yeah, because of all these secondary losses too, right? He doesn't get to see the milestones with his kids and his girlfriend, and there's all of those losses as well. And they're losses to you because you don't get to see him experiencing all of those things with
Right.
his children and his partner. That's hard.
Yeah. Yeah, very hard.
Yeah, and navigating all of that is difficult. And that's why we have this show and why we have this community to tell you guys there's folks like you, Ginger, out here. And it's okay to say it's tough because it is.
Yeah, it is.
So, couple last questions for you before we close out. Ginger, again, thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So just to touch on this real quick, because again, I'm really glad we're bringing awareness to epilepsy. And we've talked a little bit about seizures on the show before when we've had guests on. We had one guest who had a brother who had a brain tumor. So there's some overlap. But this is really bringing light to epilepsy. When your brother passed away, was there anything that he could have done differently? Or was it just, unfortunately, he had a seizure? It was the wrong time, wrong place in the shower, and that was that. Because I want to shed light on that if we can help someone with the episode, which I know we will, of course.
So that's hard because without really knowing, we don't know if he didn't take his medication with him that night when he went to his gig, because he had every intention of taking the train home that evening. So I don't know that anyone knows if he had his medication that night. And so I don't know if that could have played a part of it. He wasn't feeling well, like there was mention of maybe food poisoning or something like that. I don't know if it was food poisoning or if there was something else. I don't believe so, but I feel like maybe he didn't take his medication.
Yeah.
But to have 3 seizures in one day is one's a lot, but 3, I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody really knows.
And this is one of those things, like so many of us experience as siblings. It's something we'll never know for sure. And it's something as you move through your grief journey and your process, like you said, Ginger, your faith is strong. And so you have to just, in your case, right? And whatever works for you guys. But in your case, I'm sure you just got to a point where you're like, I just give this to God because it's just, it happened. And
we can't just keep trying to play things out in our head or mind because we just don't know, and we're never going to figure it out. And all that really does is like torture. Like for me, it's always like I'm picturing the worst thing, which God's working on me on that. But I'm trying to have a better outlook on things more positively. But with something like that, you just never know. And the more you try and think of it or put your own spin on it, it's just not good.
No, I agree with you
mentally for you. Yeah.
Yes. And it keeps you stuck. It keeps you really stuck. And it's, again, something we've talked about here before. And I wanted to get your perspective from your particular loss, Ginger. But it's also, it's okay in the beginning, right? Because we're going to do it. It's natural. It's just don't stay stuck there. That's the advice I always give, right? Find a way to release that, and whatever that is, and however that works for you, right? And I think that's really important. Ginger, before we close out, anything I didn't touch on that you would like to share with the incredible siblings and supporters that listen to our show? Any pieces of advice or anything before we close out?
No, I just want to thank you for having me, and thank you for using your platform for something like this, because up until now, even in the beginning, I thought I might find a group. I thought about starting a group at church for things like this, and I never really did. And when I saw this, I was like, oh, maybe finally some people that will understand what I'm going through. And so I just want to thank you for doing this.
My absolute pleasure. And I'm like you, years ago, like I told you, 5 years, that was a pivotal moment for me too. So I'm really happy you told your story on the show. I think there's something to 5, 10, like these are significant years, right? And so I just knew I was ready then, and I appreciate you sharing your story. So thanks for being here. And if people would like to connect with you, Ginger, where would you like them to reach out to?
I'm on Facebook, Instagram. I have a TikTok. I don't really use it that much. I'm not that tech savvy.
But you did find me, so there you go.
I did find you, and you can message me there.
Okay, perfect. We'll put your handles in the show notes. And Ginger, thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for sharing Mike. And I hope people still enjoy his music for many decades to come. And thank you again for being here. We appreciate
Thank you
it.
for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you so much for listening to the Surviving Siblings podcast. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did creating it for you, then share it on your chosen social media platform. And don't forget to tag us at Surviving Siblings Podcast so that more surviving siblings can find us. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. And don't forget to follow us on all social media platforms. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Surviving Siblings Podcast. All links can be found in the show notes, so be sure to check those out too. Thank you again for the support. Until the next episode, keep on surviving, my surviving siblings.